Hello Reddit readers, today we have stories from passionate dates on the timeline. I will not detain you anymore. Like and subscribe to the channel of pleasant viewing. Story 1 from user MellyMJ72. He had told me prior to the date he was a widower. Once I arrived at the restaurant, he told me he was saving me a parking spot by standing in it. I asked him not to, as I think it's a jerk move, and told him I'd already parked. Who wants to start a date pissing off other people who are trying to park? And yes, he said someone yelled at him while he did it, so he wanted me to make it worthwhile by changing my spot. Dear God, as soon as we were seated, he said, well, let me show you some recent vacation pics, and spent like 10 minutes explaining all his vacation pics to me. They were all him alone in the wilderness in different spots with the same dead-eyed stare. Then I mentioned my divorce, and he made this big production of how I must be so frustrated that he hadn't told me how his wife died. I said no. That's fine for now. Then he says, in case you don't believe me, and shoves his phone on my face. He was showing me his wife's death certificate. In case I don't believe what that... It was suicide. Why would I doubt it? Had there been some questions about his involvement? Why did he have his wife's death certificate at the ready? Like that, I changed the subject, realizing there's no way I'd go out with him again. But he seems very intense, so I was wary of upsetting him. He held up a plastic trash bag that was stuffed with plates of food cake, cobbler pie. My neighbor brought me some food, so I thought I'd share it with you at this point. I know there is no way I'd dare to eat whatever he brought. He doesn't seem stable. It was awkward to be at a restaurant with a massive trash bag of desserts next to me as I'm trying to wrap up our Olive Garden date. He started planning our next date. He wanted to cook for me at his place. I said, oh, I wouldn't be comfortable going to your house on a second date. I'm sorry, he says unprompted. Oh, don't worry about it. If I get too excited, I know to be a gentleman and go in the bathroom and handle it myself, so we can go on with it. Our evening, the waitress quickly brought our check over, probably because he hadn't said this quietly. I made it to my car, and that was that. Yes, I think he killed his wife. Story 2 from user deleted. I was chatting with this girl for a few days, and we decided to meet up at a beer, specializing in craft beers. The night's going well, we're hitting it off, and end up going back to her place when we get there. She asks me if I would mind taking a quick shower since I had used the bathroom at the bar a couple of times. No, I didn't stink. I took a shower before heading out to meet her. I say sure, no problem. Then she gets really serious and says, but you have to promise one thing, that you won't break my shower curtain. I'm thinking, I've literally taken thousands of showers, and this has never been a problem. I can handle this, lol. So I tell her, yeah, I promise, I won't break your shower curtain. She reiterates, you promise? Yeah, don't worry, I won't touch it. I get in the shower, and the curtain was like one of those pull-down blinds. I guess she was worried it would roll up since the ceiling was about 10ft. So in the shower, and I'm trying to be careful because there is no bath mat or anything for grip in the tub. I think you can see where this is going. I soap up, scrub down, and go to rinse off, and it felt like slow motion. My feet slip out from under me, and I go flying backwards through the shower curtain, tearing it down from its mount on the ceiling, and slam my head on her sink. I'm laying there naked and dazed, trying to figure out what just happened, and she comes running in screaming, what the did you do? My shower curtain, you broke it. She throws a towel at me and tells me to get dressed while I'm getting dressed. I'm checking to see if anything is actually broke, and it looks like it just came out of the mount. I get out of the bathroom and she's trying to push me out right away. I talk her into at least letting me fix the curtain. I get it remounted and say, so there's no hope of salvaging? This is there. Nope, not a chance. Story 3 from user The Aduki. I'd met a guy on a dating app and felt that we hit it off quite well. We messaged a lot, had video chats, and played online games together. This was during the COVID times, and after lockdown had been lifted, we decided to go out on a date. Even though social distancing and the other COVID-related stuff was still happening, we decided to meet up in our capital city where he lived, and I only live a 20-minute train ride away from when I arrived at, where we had arranged to meet outside of the train station. He wasn't there. I wasn't going to wait too long for him, but thought I'd wait for a little bit, just in case he then phoned me and asked me where I was. Turned out that he was waiting further up the road away from the station. I walked over to him and saw that he was wearing a dirty old scruffy raincoat that had black marks all over it with the waterproof layer peeling off. Definitely not first date attire, but I put it to the back of my mind. He asked if I wanted to get a drink, to which I responded, "Yes, please." He then said, "Great, well, go to this Starbucks over here because I know it's COVID secure." The Starbucks in question wasn't allowing people to sit in, but you had to queue, and only so many people could be in there at one point. When we were stood inside, my date suddenly pulled out a bottle of antibacterial gel and proceeded to smother his hands with it. He must have seen me notice it, because he said, "Oh, don't worry about this, I'm a hypochondriac." So I was doing this way before COVID. I do it all the time. I was like, okay. But that combined with the scruffy clothes just made me think, when we got our drinks, he asked, "Shall we go for a walk in the park?" I accepted the offer. However, it wasn't a nice, leisurely stroll. Instead, it was a full-blown power walk with very boring conversation. I found this confusing, as we had had great conversations online. At one point, I needed to retie my shoelace. My date was talking, but I didn't hear what he said properly. So I looked away from my shoe and up at him, and he was looking at me with an expression of pure disgust on his face. I don't think he expected me to look at him at that point and catch it. But I did. I knew at that point that there was no way that this was going to work, as I clearly disgusted him. After power walking a little further, I suddenly needed to go to the toilet when I said that I needed to go to the toilet. He said that he did too, and we power walked to the park toilets. They were locked due to COVID. So we ended up power walking through the park out a side entrance, and then he took me on a weird power walk around some back streets. At this point, I started getting anxious because this was the first time I'd met this guy in person. The vibe was off, and now here he was leading me down some secluded, empty back streets. We found a pub, but that was locked up because COVID, and we ended up power walking along more empty back streets until we got back to the park and decided to head to the shopping center. The toilets there were open. I felt extremely bored and looked at my watch. It was 12:15. I'd met him at 11:05. After we both used the toilet, he asked, "Shall we go for another drink?" I said yes, and he led the way. We ended up power walking back to the same COVID-secure Starbucks as before. He then led the way again on our walk, so I just power walked and followed his lead. He said I won't be able to stay out much longer as I'm meeting the boys for football at 1, and I have to get home and get ready. I knew then and there that he wasn't enjoying the date. Either because if you're going on a date with someone, why still arrange to see your mates? Or if you had already arranged to see your mates, you would go on the date a different day. It was clearly a lie and an excuse to leave. Then a couple of minutes later, I realized that he was leading us back to the train station, subtle as a sledgehammer. We sat on a bench outside the train station to finish our drinks, and he started telling me about his health in quite in-depth detail and about how he has epilepsy. I could tell that he was using it to try and put me off him, and the look of panic on his face when I told him that my uncle has epilepsy, and that witnessing seizures and helping people when they are having seizures is completely normal to me was priceless. When it got to 1 p.m., he said that he had to go, even though he was supposed to be meeting his friends at 1 p.m. after going home and getting ready. So I said, "Enjoy football," and pretended that I didn't know that it was an obvious lie in doing so. I unintentionally caught him out, because he was like, "What?" Looked really confused, realized what he said, then was like, "Oh yeah, thanks," then left. We met up at 11:05. I was on the train home by 1:30. Story 4 from user.nodded. Oh, it's a tie for me between 3 went on a first date about 89 years ago with a guy that I'd really hit it off with after we matched on Tinder. He was very much my type at the time. Tall, handsome, polite, sensitive, witty lead singer in a band, but very well put together. He looked better than he did in photos. A bit of a sexy vampire look. Black shirt, black denim jeans, long tailored black coat, piercing eyes and longish blonde hair. We both just couldn't stop smiling when we saw each other. It's about an hour into the date. We're walking around a beautiful area in London, laughing gently, brushing hands. Then it starts drizzling a little bit. So I look for shelter. This man takes my hand, pulls me under the open sky, and starts slow dancing with me, singing some old song about love. There's no one around, just us dancing, his beautiful voice in my ear. I'm a romantic, like a cheesy, borderline cringy romantic. But the whole time he's holding me and singing to me under the rain, I'm thinking, I am not into this. It feels too much, too scripted, performative almost. And he smells kinda weird. Long story short, he eventually breaks down in tears and tells me he's sexually aroused by attractive women shitting their pants and then not wiping for days. I didn't say anything judgy. The guy felt bad enough as it is. I just had to keep a straight face, voice, and casually tell him it wasn't something I was into. 2021 COVID times. I'm staying with family in my home county. You could go to someone's house, very small groups, no parties, but there was an 11 p.m. curfew, ill prefaced by saying, I had recently come out of a long-term relationship and the breakup had been prolonged and heartbreaking. So I was feeling extremely lonely, anxious, and clearly not making good decisions anyway. I'd been chatting to this guy that I'd matched with on Bumble. We'd been texting and FaceTiming almost every day for a month, and while there were some quirks about him, I completely ignored them. I was dog-sitting for my friend one evening, and we agreed that he'd come meet me there. My friend knew she was totally fine with it. Bear in mind, he'd have to leave from my friend's house by like 10:15 p.m. the latest to be home by 11 p.m. He shows up to our first date with a bottle of wine and a little baggie of Coke, starts doing Coke. Oh, the kitchen counter, I'm sat on the sofa, just kind of trying to process where I went wrong in my life. He joins me on the sofa, asks to see my phone, and specifically who else I'm chatting to on dating apps. I shut that down. He gets annoyed because he's been loyal to me, but obviously I'm just playing games, I'm checked out at this point and just ask him to leave. He didn't try to argue too much. Just calls me half hour later and asks if I could bring a blanket down so he can cover up with something while he sleeps in his car. Because apparently he won't get home in time before the curfew. There was absolutely enough time. I told him he's being manipulative and that he can drive home. But if he chooses to stay in his car overnight in February, I'm not going to feel bad, and I'm certainly not going to get him a blanket anyway. I think he actually stayed the whole night. I didn't bring him a blanket and never saw him again. Story 5 from user John S90 Dao. I almost up even managing to go on the date by getting super drunk the night before with some friends and sending her a completely unintelligible series of texts that I had no recollection of sending to her. I woke up about lunchtime the next day, and she had been trying to call me as we were meant to be meeting at 2. I rang her straight back and apologized profusely. She was actually super cool about it. Said, we'd all been there, and if I still wanted to meet her, she was on her way into town. Amazing what a great person giving me a chance. Even though I'd been an absolute nightmare. Best behavior today, you'll suffer through the hangover as punishment and make the effort she deserves. Had a shower changed and necked a couple of ibuprofen for the hangover and hopped on the bus into town. These were a brand of ibuprofen I'd not taken before, however. And on the bus to town, I started getting quite hot. Probably just the hangover sweats, right? I feel kind of itchy too on my chest. Maybe it's just from drying a bit aggressively in my rush. Get to the bar and meet her. You okay? You look a bit red. She says, yeah, sorry. Been in a bit of a rush. I reply. My voice scratchier than I remember it being less than 10 minutes of conversation later, and my lips and eyelids feel like they've begun swelling up. I go to the toilets to discover that under my shirt, my entire torso is covered in blotches, had to cut the date short and run to the pharmacy to buy some antihistamines. I had been at the bar for 12 minutes. We had been speaking for 3 months. I never spoke to her again. Genuinely think my parting words were, I think there's something wrong with me. I still stand by those words. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and write comments. See you later.